Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final session in our summer series organised by the Orthodox Fellowship of St. John the Baptist, entitled Through the Prayers of Our Holy Fathers and Mothers. My name's Margaret Haig, and I'm the current chair of the Fellowship, for those who don't know. The Fellowship brings together Orthodox Christians from the different traditions in the British Isles and Ireland through talks, pilgrimages, conferences and youth festivals. And if you're interested in finding out more about the Fellowship, or joining us, in fact, then please do have a look at our website. I will put that in the chat now, and there'll be a link there for you to have a look at, so please do. And that includes our guests from overseas. You don't have to be based in the British Isles to join. Next year, we'll be organising an in-person conference, and we would like you to save the date and come along if you can. This will be the 25th to the 29th of August 2022. And will be held in the beautiful and holy place of Walsingham in Norfolk. We're excited to announce that we will be joined by Father Stephen de Young, author of The Religion of the Apostles and co-host of the Lord of All Spirits podcast on Ancient Faith Radio. The working title of the conference is Angelic Beings. We hope to open applications in September, so that's not very far away now, so do look out for that. We're pleased to offer these sessions for free, but we do welcome donations to the Fellowship, which will help us to reduce the cost of the conference next year so that more people can attend. And the link for making a donation, if you'd like to, is in the chat as well. I've already put that in. This summer series focuses on some of the important saints and witnesses of the 20th century. We've already heard about Father Nikolai Steinhardt, Saint Silouan and Saint Sophrony, Saint Maria of Paris, Metropolitan Anthony of Souroge, and last week, Father Alexander Men. This evening, we welcome Dr. Evangelia Voulgaraki-Pissina, joining us from Greece. And before I make my formal introduction, I would like to send the love and prayers of us all to Evie and to all affected in Greece by the terrible wildfires which are happening. This evening, Evie will be speaking to us about Saint Porphyrios and Mother Gavrilia. She was born in Athens and is a lecturer in Missiology at the Department of Social Theology and Religious Sciences at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. She teaches Missiology, Interfaith Dialogue, and Christianity in the Contemporary World at undergraduate level. At postgraduate level, she teaches Patristics and Mission, Orthodoxy in Africa, Witness, Diaconia and Politics, and Identity and Otherness from a theological perspective. She has been internationally active in the World Council of Churches, Syndesmos, and the Balkan Orthodox Youth Association. She's now a member of the steering committee of the Missiology group of the International Orthodox Theological Association, or IOTA, director of productions at Maestros Publications, and editor-in-chief of SALT, Crossroads of Religion and Culture. She's the author of several books in Greek, including Approaching the Pagans According to St. John Chrysostom, published by Maestros in 2016. And coming soon, so for those Greek speakers and Greek readers among you, coming soon is Persuasion and Coercion, Babylus versus Apollo, an example of religious conflict in late antiquity. As normal, I have muted you all, so we do encourage questions, so please put those into the chat, either as you think of them as we go through, or you can put them in at the end. And if you find the chat notifications distracting, you can actually just turn those off. We'll address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Hopefully everyone knows how to use chat by now, but just a quick reminder, if you're on a laptop or a computer, it's at the bottom of your screen with a speech bubble called chat. And if you're on a tablet or a smartphone, you might need to tap the screen or swipe the screen to find chat. I recommend you go on to Speaker View. There won't be a presentation, so Evie will just be speaking to us directly for the most part, but it's quite distracting to have other images on screen unless you do Speaker View, so I do recommend that. Other than that, all that remains is for me to say a short prayer for us to begin our session this evening. O Heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of Truth, who art in all places and fillest all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us from all impurity, and of thy goodness save our souls. Amen. Evie, over to you.
Thank you. Nice seeing you all. Well, when I was first asked to speak about Eldris Gavrilia, I in fact declined. One reason was my initial fear of speaking in English in front of a British audience, and my concern that I would give you a hard time to understand my accent. I apologize for this, as English is a foreign language for me. The other issue was that I knew close to nothing about Eldris Gavrilia. Only now have I made her acquaintance, but I made a small survey around me, and then I got to know many people who did know her and who were very eager to share their experience with me. I also studied the book about her by Sister Gavrilia the Younger. It's this one. It also exists in English, who was in her community for many years, and a more recent book by Sister Philothea. Through the books and by what people confided in me, I came to realize what an important personality Eldris Gavrilia was, and in particular, how important she was for mission in Christ's way, in the way of silent witness and diaconia, in the patristic spirit, the spirit of philokalia. She was one of the greatest Orthodox missionaries of the 20th century, both foreign and domestic. Being a missiologist, I felt ashamed, humbled, and excited at the same time, and deep indebted. Suddenly, the invitation was as if she had picked me up in my total ignorance, chosen me in my total unworthiness to receive and welcome me among her friends. Perhaps I was meant to highlight her contribution in mission and play my own humble part vis-à-vis her official recognition as a saint, because a saint she certainly was, and a much needed saint, one that differed from the usual type of ascetic saints, which I cherish and respect, but somehow they tend to guide us all in the same direction, as if sainthood were of one kind only, and as if we were supposed to introduce a monoculture of just one sort of spiritual flower. Gavrilia was a woman, a layperson, a nun in later life. But before all, she was a bohemian type. That is something I particularly like. Part of her biography reminded me beatnik literature, a constant on the road. The beatnik movement, hipsters, drugs, and all. And yet, as we read in Wikipedia, beat was slang for beaten down or downtrodden. But to Kerouac and Ginsberg, it also had a spiritual connotation, as in beatitude. Jack Kerouac, the founder of the beatnik movement, had a religious background, a Catholic one, which inspired him. The crucified Jesus allowed for a reversed way of looking at things. To be beaten down can bring beatitude or manifest beauty. And Gavrilia saw the beauty in every poor and sick person, in every leper and outcast of this world, whom she served and loved with all her heart, all her life, and honored them as the image and likeness of Christ our Lord. In Gavrilia's case, there was no thirst for adventure for adventure's sake, but a fearless attitude and a readiness to move, to undertake risks and danger to fulfill what she understood as the will of God for her. Thy will be done, she prayed, and she meant it. And as a result, she was a most accomplished missionary, a true apostle, combining penia, voluntary poverty, odiporia, wandering, roaming around, diaconia, service, martyria, witness, as a true role model of unconventional sainthood and service. I now wished, in fact longed, to study her personality and life. Gavrilia was born on 2 October 1897 as Avrilia Papayani, Lila to those close to her, and passed away on 28 March 1992. She was the fourth and last child of a middle-class merchant family in Constantinople. She received a solid and broad education. The family was close to the circle of the patriarchate in the Fanar. She was particularly attached to her mother and her older sister, who initiated her into a Christian life. After the Asia Minor disaster in 1922 and the Treaty of Lausanne the following year, the family had to flee Constantinople. They settled in Thessaloniki, where she was accepted as an auditor, non-degree student in classical studies at the university. At that time, only men could study, and she was the second woman ever to be accepted at a Greek university. During the summers, the family stayed in Florina, Western Macedonia, where she taught the children of the area. Already at that time, she had one of her first spiritual experiences. Later, she moved to Athens, where she worked nursing people in different facilities. In 1937, she decided to travel to England, although she had no visa. She was 40 years old. In France, she persuaded the British Council to grant her a visa. This was the first of many times that she had to plead and convince someone to grant her a visa for one country or another. First night in London, she stayed in a YMCA guest house. Next day, she looks for a job as a teacher or home help. She was now penniless. She arranged for a job with a Jewish family to teach the children French. She waited and waited for them to collect her. They came only to cancel the arrangement, but they found her waiting all alone in the street so patiently that they finally took her in. When she later learned about it, she thought it was the angels that assisted her. She was very fond of angels, from her early years right up to her death. Some fundamentalist and narrow-minded Christians called her a heretic because of this fondness and love for the angels, and because of her indiscriminate love for all mankind, regardless of religious identity. They were so wrong, so untrue. Gavrilia was Orthodox to the very core of her being. She had a childlike heart, not a naively childish heart, but in the sense that Christ asked us all to become like children. I can find no other explanation to her loving angels and seeing angels all around. She never mixed the Orthodox understanding of the angelic beings with any other forms of belief, as is so fashionable today in some so-called yoga schools. Her second job in England was with Miss Florence Bright, an actor and playwright, a friend of Bernard Shaw, and herself a vegan and a suffragette. That was where Gavrilia performed her first therapy, to the point that after 2 months, the bedridden old lady was able to walk and even to go to a suffragette celebration for the 20th anniversary of women getting the vote. It was there that Gavrilia also took up the habit of abstaining from meat. At the same time, she studied as a physiotherapist, in fact, as a chiropodist. She thought that one could reach and heal a person, as she says, through the feet to the heart. Later in her life, she aimed directly to the heart. But she soon realized that to succeed in her studies, she had to take exams in general medicine. And yet, this did not stop her. She obtained a diploma that would give her an important tool for life. During the war and the Blitz in London, she worked as a secretary for a doctor who was at the front. She always slept in her own bed, never going to a shelter and fearing nothing. In 1945, right after the war, she goes back to Greece to help people there along with a Quaker group. She becomes a director of their school. In 1947, she opens a therapy center in Athens, Massalia Street. Whatever she earned during the day, she distributed before sunset. I omit some of her many itineraries just for time's sake. On 24th March 1954, her mother passed away. Gavrilia had been very attached to her, as we said. On that very day, she could hear clearer than ever her own personal calling. And this was to sell her belongings and give to the poor and follow him, as stands in Matthew 19, verse 21. This inner voice would lead her to India, a country she never had any ties with. That very day of her mother's death and the 2 days that followed, she had one of the most painful, significant, and decisive experiences in her life. She saw herself next to her mother's deathbed, being dead too. She saw a light leading her to her new path. She clearly heard the word India. The light was still there on the 25th, Annunciation Day, and the 26th, the feast of Archangel Gabriel. It was as if her beloved mother had opened the way for her. 3 days later, a young man who looked Indian visited her practice in Massalia Street, Athens. He was British, a Quaker, who wanted to travel to India to discover his origins. She was convinced that this was a sign. She asked him to go together. Cameron was his name. She was already dead to the world, but somehow she received instead an invitation to a conference in Vienna, where she met with 2 Indian Christians, 2 students. They gave her a book on Sivananda, a famous Indian guru. Her path was carved out. She now knew where she was going. She traveled via Italy to Haifa, Israel, where she worked at a kibbutz till mid-October. She met the Jewish writer Hanekbi and Cameron again. She made friends for life with many people she met, and she kept up these friendships through correspondence for many years. More coincidences enhanced her course towards Sivananda. From Israel and Palestine, she went to Cyprus and then to Lebanon and to Amman, Jordan. Through marvelous coincidences, she succeeds in getting a visa. She travels alone by bus from Lebanon to Baghdad and then to Zahedan, Karachi, Hyderabad in Pakistan, and then Delhi, where she stayed for the first night among her Quaker friends. A conviction was already shaped in her mind that God calls each and every one alone. Solitude was her company for many years, but she never hesitated, postponed, or cancelled plans out of fear. Her love was greater than fear. She also believed that when an invitation came, it should be considered as an invitation from above, and she should always accept, knowing that if it were not the will of God, obstacles would prevent it from happening. This was her personal way of obedience, to accept all invitations, no matter how inconvenient they were to her own plans and well-being. Although she taught us to say yes in an obedient spirit, nevertheless, she did say no sometimes, when she thought she would be trapped in a situation that was not from God. And yet another moment, I'll come to that later. In Delhi, she made the acquaintance of many important people. She kept a diary and notes, which are amazing in terms of the names included there. She considered the rich and the poor of equal value. One day she would stay in Indira Gandhi's palace to treat her personally, the next sleep on a bench in a train station. She would teach us to sleep as they sleep and eat as they eat. And this is an implicit criticism of Western missionaries who looked down on local people, mixing our faith with a sense of superiority in terms of culture, so-called progress, and social status. I'm not generalizing, I'm speaking of the Western missionaries she met there in India. After a short while, she continues to the Himalayas, to the headwaters of the river Ganges, where Shivananda's ashram is. He welcomes her personally. He asks her to teach his followers the secrets of physiotherapy, and she even publishes a book including her techniques and several pictures of her teaching and treating people. She stays with them initially for 7 months, starting on 24 May 1955. It was 14 months already after her mother's death and her subsequent calling. A quiet life was a daily routine in the ashram, filled with prayer and study. There were also many European visitors, as the Hindu way of life had a great appeal in the West. They were seekers of the truth in some exotic place or exotic religion. But Gavrilia was not the type. She never pretended to be something other than she was. She kept her European style of dress, but she was not afraid of living with the Hindus. A fundamentalist apartheid was far from her heart. This is something, in my opinion, that narrow-minded and mean-spirited religious people back home never forgave her, and they did her an injustice. Gavrilia was very clear in her Orthodox faith. Nevertheless, because of this faith, she did not consider any people as polluted, but only as images of Christ and brothers and sisters in Christ, no matter if they acknowledged it or not. Later, she would form a very close bond with Baba Amte, an Indian who founded a home for lepers. She regarded his family as her own to the last days of her life. What guided her was the notion of service, diaconia, and unconditional love. She would not speak a word of advice unless asked. She would rebel against the fact that the guru in the ashram was considered a god and was worshipped, but she would keep it to herself in order to help more people. In Sivananda's ashram, she met a young man, Alan, from Australia, who went there as a truth seeker and was about to convert to Hinduism. Without trying to change his wishes, she guided him in a very subtle and gradual way, first leading him to a Hindu yogi who lived alone outside the ashram, and later to a Christian priest and spiritual father. Alan was baptized into the Orthodox Church. This caused probably much displeasure among the leaders of the ashram. One morning, she realized that her bed had changed position, and they asked her with great curiosity how she had slept that night. In fact, she had been in total darkness, blinded and feeling threatened. She prayed the Jesus prayer all night. She pretended everything had been fine, to their astonishment, but she knew they had been using evil powers against her while she had been protected by superior power, God Almighty. It was time to go. But she didn't go right away. In December, she was invited to Dehradun to teach physiotherapy at a center for blind adults. She returned to the ashram of Sivananda for a short while at Christmas, and then she moved to Aurora at the Anand Van, the leper village founded by Baba Amte, who proved to be a lifelong friend and spiritual brother. Baba Amte was a lawyer and political activist from one of the most prominent Brahmin families in India, followers of Gandhi. He dedicated his life to service, practical service, not political service after a while, and in particular service to lepers. Gavrilia treated the lepers' hands and feet, washed their clothes, cared for them, nursed them. In 1958, she stayed for 11 months all alone in Himalaya in Uttarkashi, in complete solitude and self-denial. She used to say about herself that I do not exist, not with any Hinduistic nirvana connotation, but in a Christian sense of self-denial and readiness to follow Jesus Christ. This was yet another thing she had in common with Saint Porphyrios. There she felt no hunger or cold in Himalaya, dressed in a summer robe, protected by angels from wild animals. It was a period of absolute poverty and deep spiritual experience of happiness and joy in the presence of God. Gavrilia thought that she could spend all her life in India, feeling at home wherever she was in the world. Her homeland could be everywhere. This is the sort of ecumenical spirit she was. But things did not turn out that way. On the 5th of August 1959, she reaches Bethany in Jerusalem, the monastery of Bethany. Now she lives initially on probation in a busy monastery, following the common program, eating the common food, obeying monastic rules. But her fame follows her. She receives different kinds of invitations and divides her time between Athens and Bethany up to 1966. In between, she visits Constantinople at the invitation of the Ecumenical Patriarch Athinagoras and is sent to Thésée, France, and then Bern, Switzerland. By invitation of Archbishop Giacobos, she makes a tour of America, where she gives lectures to vast audiences in the USA and Canada. Now she treats the heart, speaking about the Orthodox faith in a directly missionary way. She speaks of the wonder we live in and the joy of Jesus Christ. She returns to France on a steamboat and visits many European countries, also the north of Europe. She also visits India once again. She receives an invitation from Elder Sophrony in Essex. As she later confided to some of those close to her, I cannot verify this information, but it stands in the book and is verified by ear witnesses. He had asked her to become the elders of the women's monastery. It was one of the very few times she declined, feeling the responsibility too exalted and saying that the angels cannot be confined in one place and that she would follow their lead. She comes back to Greece for an operation in the eye, and she recuperates as a guest in Evangelistria, New Jerusalem Monastery, main Greece. She was also attached to Fathers Paul and Amphilochios from Patmos. The latter transferred her to the little schema, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, most probably in 1966, and gave her the blessing to carry out mission. She visits Africa in 1968 after a long period when she had assisted the Inter-Orthodox Missionary Center Porphyrios, and in particular Father Antonius Romeos, by translating for the Porphyrios Journal. From Kenya, she wrote to friends that Christ had an African dimension. Here Christ is an African. She also believed that one should overcome colonialism and heal the wounds. She was sending her angels in prayer so that the Africans do not experience any further pain. She thought that the colonialists exploited everything, but they could not distinguish the most valuable, the barefoot and poor Jesus in every African, one of the most valuable things still in Africa. I omit much of her itinerary to follow her to the humble apartment in Medea Street in Kypseli, downtown Athens, granted to her by Father Agathangelos Michaelitis. The House of the Angels, they called it. And in that house, she shared all her wisdom and grace with every visitor and a small community of women gathered around her. Nothing was permanent in her life. In fact, she lived in perpetual mobility. She left on 17th April 1989 for Aegina, invited by Metropolitan Erothos, who granted her a small Kelion Agia Skepi, holy protection, which belonged to St. Nectarius' monastery. This one was called the waiting room for heaven. Sick with Hodgkin's disease and advanced lymphatic cancer, she was hospitalized on 21st February. On Easter Day, 14th April 1990, during the night liturgy, the cancer, incurable though it was, disappeared forever. This was a healing miracle she experienced in her own body. Later the same year, on 25th November 1990, she arrived in Leros, which was her last habitation on Earth. She led an ecclesiastic life there with very few contacts. She was 95 years old and had lived a full and holy life. She did not believe in death, another thing she had in common with Saint Porphyrios. There is no death, she said. It is just another door. She passed away on 28 March 1992 in the cell of the Holy Angels Leros. After her death, and according to her wish, a monastery was built in Leros devoted to the Holy Angels. Thanks to the women around her in Medea Street, we have a small tape of hers. In a youthful, girlish voice, the 90-year-old Gerondissa talks to us by means of technology, and we are blessed by this opportunity to come into direct contact of a human and physical nature with the authentic expression of Sister Gavrilia. What is life? This was the question she was asked during this an unofficial interview by Kassiani Panotsopoulou, a sociologist. It's a mystery. The greatest mystery for humans, she answered. I cannot give another explanation except what Christ said, that I am life. Then she was asked about death. There's no death. It's just a door closing and another opening. She had a Christocentric and pneumatocentric understanding of things. The Holy Spirit is in us. It is the breath of God He bestowed on us when He bestowed life. We receive it through baptism. The key to everything is the degree of our love. She stressed again and again. Example, silence and love is the teaching method. One should not talk unless asked, and one should give to the one who asks for something. This is also the very heart of mission theology in the Orthodox tradition, in the patristic spirit. Our children do not belong to us, she said in that tape on another subject. They belong to God. We should not put on them heavy burdens of our unfulfilled desires and our ambitions. We should teach them through example to love in an unlimited way. Borders of social class, financial status, or whatever else are very harmful to teach to children whose heart is ready to love all children and all human beings the way God loves us. Faith, love, and mission is the triplet that led her whole life. She was a spirit of independence and personal resolution, a truly free person, free from need or fear. Perhaps because love casts out fear. And there is a great need for us all to have such examples, such role models. Others have really had spiritual contact to Saint Porphyrios, and we have a report of a telephone call between them from a direct witness, Dr. Nicoletta Bellesi, a medical doctor. He called her in December 1991 to say goodbye to her because he was leaving for Kafsokalivia on Mount Athos. She was astonished where he had found her phone number. Also because he asked her to sit, as if he could see she was standing out of respect and excitement. She was also ill at the time, and she passed away 3 months later. They discussed many things and arranged for a meeting, first in prayer and then in heaven. She was filled with joy. The unexpected defines destiny. This was the comment she made, knowing for sure that she would meet Saint Porphyrios in heaven. I'm sorry, I need to correct a mistake. This allows me to move on to Saint Porphyrios. While I was particularly happy to be able to read about Eldris Gavrilia and was overwhelmed with people who could add to my knowledge of her, I'm also deeply thankful for this opportunity to speak about Saint Porphyrios, a person I had known my whole life, with whom I felt very familiar. But first, a brief outline of his life, which is much simpler than Eldris Gavrilia's. He did not travel a lot, but his charisma was unique. He could be in all kinds of different places in spirit. He came from a poor peasant family in Evia, from the village St. John in Caristia. This is the place where we have wildfires all the time and today. Born Evangelos Bayraktaris on 7 February 1906, last of 5 children, he passed away on 2 December 1991. His father had to immigrate to America to earn a living, and Evangelos had to leave school at the age of 7 to guard the sheep, and then was sent alone to work in a shop in Chalkida, the capital of Evia, and then to a relative in Piraeus. He was very willing and obedient. He was inspired by the life of St. John the Kalivitis from Kalivia of Mount Athos, from a book he had obtained in his village and was reading syllable by syllable at the age of 7. And at 12, he fled to Mount Athos. There he was, under obedience to 2 very strict elders, Panteleimon and Ioannikios, who had helped him enter the mountain as children were forbidden there. He loved and obeyed them without doubting, showing the same eagerness as he had as a boy shop assistant in the city. He was tonsured a monk at 14 and received the great schema at 16. While he dreamt only of living on Mount Athos and praised God like a nightingale in the wilderness, God had other plans for him. He fell seriously ill with lung disease and had to go back to the world. Illnesses troubled him throughout his life. He returned to Evia, met again with his parents, and stayed at the monastery of St. Charalambos. He was ordained in 1926, after some resistance, by the Archbishop of Sinai, Porphyrios III, who also gave him his name. At 22, he became a confessor and a spiritual father. In 1940, right before the war, he was appointed chaplain at the Polyclinic in the center of Athens in Omonia Square. He served there, surrounded by human pain, for over 30 years. In 1979, he settled in Milesi, Northeast Attica, where he founded a monastery. Having lived all his life in the world and blessed the world with his charisma, he went towards the end of his life to Kafsokalivia on Mount Athos. He passed into heaven on 2 December 1991. His last words were that they are one, the last teaching of Christ to his disciples during the Last Supper, a wish and command to us all. On 27th November 2013, he was officially recognized as a saint by the Holy Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. There are lots of books on Saint Porphyrios. I have here some, just a small selection, as well as a lot of still unrecorded oral history. There are many books in English too, I'm sure. The most significant book is the one edited by Chrysopigi Monastery in Hania, Life and Speeches, which is published in English under the title as Wounded by Love, The Life and Wisdom of Elder Porphyrios. There are also all sorts of sayings and stories about him, which I grew up with, and some which I saw and heard at first hand. I was particularly asked to give a personal testimony about this holy person living among us. So please excuse the personal tone of this part. I shall mostly speak from experience, practical experience, I mean. Saint Porphyrios was Father Porphyrios to me, Gerondas to my aunt, a friend to my father. He was all around my parents' family and all around my own family, and I greatly thank him for his presence in our lives. He played an important role in significant turning points in my life, including my decision to study theology. I got to know Father Porphyrios when I was 11, at a private home in Marousi, a northern suburb of Athens. My aunt, who would later become a nun, took me with her. I felt it was a great honor. She also explained me a few things. I should know about Father Porphyrios, for instance, that he had proratikon charisma, the gift of foreknowledge. He blessed me and asked a few things children are asked during their first encounters with confession. If I love my parents, if I quarrel with my brother, if I lie. Yet the quality was there. Then I met him again in Milesi or Opos, and I do remember the trailer he was living in at first, at the place where his monastery was to be built later. I was a couple of years older by then, and I could understand more. We visited several times, also with my mother and father and brother. Very fond of my father as I was, I had started reading his manuscripts, and somehow he wanted me to do this and to hear my critique, or he would test me to see if I could understand and follow his writing, if it was clear enough, as I was representing an average, not very well-informed audience. My father was a late theology professor at the University of Athens, Elias Voulgarakis, the founder of modern Orthodox Missiology. By that time, my father had written a very important little book of a broader interest titled, "Why Do You Judge Your Brother?" I had read it through as a manuscript and I was very impressed. It was full of patristic wisdom and it gave such a freedom of thought, something very different to the narrow morality of the Christian fellowships, which I was somewhat familiar with. My father had dedicated this book to Elder Porphyrios. So we went there, mother, father, and me, and my father had put the book dedicated to the elder in an envelope. We were sitting around the table in front of the trailer, and Father Porphyrios asked my dad to take a walk with him. He hadn't opened the envelope. He just took him along and discussed with him the issue of reproach and judgment. Porphyrios told my father that if one took into consideration the patristic literature beyond the desert fathers, the so-called social fathers in particular, such as John Chrysostom, one could understand how one can criticize, even scold someone else out of positive interest and love. My father realized that it was a discussion on the topic of the book that had remained packed in its envelope. But somehow Father Porphyrios knew in full what it was about. My father was amazed by the fact that he knew, and he took the comments as a well-meant, constructive criticism in a brotherly spirit. My father's acceptance of the criticism, which was meant in a very friendly and brotherly way, and the whole incident introduced me to the personality of Father Porphyrios. I was still around 13 and quite a melancholic child in my early adolescence, so I was sad without knowing why, and I didn't want to bother him. So many people were there waiting, full of their problems. And even if I had a problem, I did not know what it was. So after he talked with my aunt, he called for me. And I didn't know what was wrong with me, and he soothed me with his parrot. He lived in a small hut then, and he had substituted the trailer, and he had a parrot. Father Porphyrios made the parrot speak to me, and I laughed. And all of a sudden, I realized his immense love and his immense care. Without me raising any question or concern, He had answered all my concerns. Anyway, another time I did wish to discuss with him a matter of great importance, but I was all upset by the fact that he would read my thoughts. I was getting very evil thoughts all the time. I was afraid and stressed, and on the other hand, I was trying to remember everything he would tell me, memorize it like a gramophone, to replay it again and again and analyze it later. I was so over-anxious. Well, he knew it. He asked me, "Are you paying attention? Can you concentrate?" My mind was really scattered all over the place, but I was kind of determined to record what he would say, like a tape recorder. So I asked, "How do I get rid of evil thoughts? How can I send them away? They preoccupy me all the time." So he says, "If you're in a dark room, how can you send the darkness away? Can you take a cloth and chase it away? What would you do?" I did realize what he was trying to tell me. "I open a window," I said. "Well, that is what you should do," he said. "You should open a window. And the window is Christ. Christ is the light." All was clear for me, and there was no longer any fear in my heart. He also added that I should feel as if I were in love with Christ. And being myself in a first love with a boy my age, feeling my heart beat, my mind move towards my love, and my imagination fully surrendered and captivated, I grasped everything. And I did somehow fall in love with Christ, filled with the warm and strong feelings of an enthusiastic adolescent heart, which unfortunately were not always so strongly present during adulthood with its daily concerns. This command, this advice that I should feel myself in love with Christ was a great help to me. It was of unique significance and extremely well targeted. Another yet very significant time I met him was when we had decided to use him as a mediator, in fact a referee, on an issue that troubled us. Well, I was already 14 and I had decided to study theology, but my mother was against it. She knew very well the theological environment, the trouble it had caused my father, and how narrow-minded and narrow-hearted, even mean it could be at times. My father did not take any active part in my decision process because he did not want to influence me. My mother also had a practical mind, and she knew that theology wouldn't pay off. Besides, I had a mind for mathematics, and I could have made a career in the Polytechnic. That was true. But since I was to study theology, I decided to take an opportunity offered to us at school because there was a classical lyceum opening up the following year, and I could attend this exquisite classical lyceum instead of a common general lyceum. It was a unique opportunity. It was thus a matter of urgency for me to finalize this decision. We went on arguing and in real distress in my family up to the day that, on my aunt's advice, we decided to ask Father Porphyrios. So I went there, and cheeky as I was, I said something like, "Well, Father Porphyrios, I need to ask you something, and if you say yes, I will obey. But if you tell me no, I don't know, I cannot guarantee anything." I knew I would be scolded for this, fairly enough, but he did not scold me at all. Despite the fact that he had told my father that one can scold out of love, he didn't use scold at all. Well, he said, "Ask your question." And I said very plainly as a child, "I wish to study theology. Is it okay?" And I thought he would talk and analyze or respond with questions or become argumentative and say something like, "You would like to study theology because," or "Have you considered this or that," as I was used from discussions in the family. But he said, yes, a simple yes. It was easy for me to obey. No doubt about it. It was difficult for my mother to accept. but she did accept it later when we told her. After I went out, Porphyrios had a little chat with my aunt, and he encouraged her that the family should allow me to study theology. Well, I don't know if I should say this part, but it's the first time I say it. He also told her that I would become a good theologian at my 14. I have never said this before in public because it sounds more flattering to me than to Father Porphyrios. But over the years, whenever I had difficulties and almost felt like abandoning theology, somehow I always came back to this talk with Father Porphyrios. It humbled me and chained me to theology. Many times in my life, I have asked myself, what would it mean to become a good theologian? It became a command and a point of orientation that I needed to serve with all my heart. How could I combine academic thinking with the experience of God? Because this is what theology is all about. In the following years, I met Father Porphyrios several times, disobeyed him once, when I asked him for his blessing to go to Germany for postgraduate studies. At first he said no, fearing that I would mess myself up with Protestant teachings. I was astonished because in the academic circles I moved, this would be a very peculiar thing to say. But then, as if he could see everything in my life, he spoke differently. Oh, now I see. You wish to escape from certain personal situations. I nodded yes, and he gave me permission to go. There was some mistrust that interfered after this incident. I'm a very mistrustful person, but he did not take it to heart. Another time, I raised the issue of some youthful sins of mine. He immediately consoled me, saying, "This is over now." He never concentrated much on wretchedness or sin, only on Christ's light and love. It was very comforting, but also liberating for me. Repentance was not a masochistic feeling. It was an easily made change of route. Much mourning over sins would signify a big ego. So humbly and plainly, he put me back on the right track. He has been with our family all the years since. He blessed my daughter Mary when I was pregnant with her. He passed away before my boys were born, but he saved both their lives. And all happened the same year, 1995, when they were seriously ill. My youngest is called Elias Porphyrios by a peculiar way of providence. I can give details during the discussion if you want. Whenever I am in trouble, next to God and the Theotokos, I ask Father Porphyrios for his guidance and his healing power. I try to realize how much theology is about healing and loving. And by love, we mean all-inclusive, infinite love. Saint Porphyrios had asked my aunt to learn by heart 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 to 13, about love. She did become a nun in his monastery later in her life. She could sense his presence there. There may be numerous stories to tell that reveal his charisma to us, from greetings and advice he sent to relatives of ours we had not mentioned, to travel instructions to places he had never been, or incidents that happened during a pilgrimage when he was with us only spiritually. The teaching that he offered me, my family, personally with words that he spoke, prayers and deeds was very important. We were privileged and indebted. It was also just a sample of how he assisted so many people. He's saying that I should concentrate on light, which I received at the time as a unique piece of advice addressed to me only, was one of his most solid and permanent teachings. It was common to us all and uniquely given to each and every one of us in a way that we could understand and could have a meaningful impact on our lives. Saint Porphyrios combined asceticism with love for life and joy in life, and his unique theology and philanthropic spirit. Before he left. He gave us his walking stick. I bless you all now with it. His theological and spiritual quality being quintessential, I truly urge you to read his books and learn more about him. All I was not able to sufficiently and adequately convey in this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Evie, for a wonderful review of two incredible modern teachers, a saint and an eldress, who I think is possibly on that road to sainthood, as you said. We have got some questions in the chat and I will pass them on, but I don't know if I could possibly ask you about sharing the special drawing of Saint Porphyrios. Is that possible to share with everyone?
A drawing, yes. Well, okay, share screen, share, not this one. It's this one. Well, it's not a very good picture because there's glass. It's just a drawing, semi-Byzantine, more portrait-like, of my mother's. He gave her the blessing to draw and learn iconography. And I don't know, it shows his kindness and his smiley eyes more than everything.
Yes, that certainly comes across. That feeling of love certainly comes through that picture. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Okay, I will move to the chat, and there are already lots of thanks from different people. I'll go back to the beginning, if you like, and start with Mother Gavrilia. Father Julian has asked whether she actually worked as a chiropodist in the UK and Athens before she went to India. I think the answer is yes, but just wanted to check that. Yeah, she did. So when she published her book in India, she was already very experienced with that.
Yes, because she had the experience from her own praxis in Massalia Street. In
Yes.
England, I don't know how much she worked on that, but she did have some experience.
Yeah. It's really interesting, isn't it, when you were talking about that and through the feet to the heart. And I was just thinking, of course, of the washing of the feet by Christ, of the apostles. So that it has so many wonderful connotations. Regina has asked what her great achievement in India was, do you think? Perhaps the lesson that we can learn from her time in India.
Service. Service to all outcasts and leper people. And this was a manifestation and mission in her way. But she also kind of stopped many people from moving over to Hinduism. For example, Alan, I mentioned, and recently came across a friend of mine who told me that reading her book, she decided to remain in the Orthodox Church because she is an alternative therapist and very much influenced by Indian practices, and all this is mixed up with religion. So Sophronius and Gavrilia teachings were the ones that kept her here.
That's so interesting, isn't it? That yes, and we've already heard during the series about another nun who was very unconventional and kind of dealt with everyone, Saint Maria of Paris, Saint Maria Skobtsova. And Elizabeth has asked a question that I was thinking of, so we're obviously along the same lines. Elizabeth says, do we know whether Mother Gavrilia had any contact with, or at least knowledge of, Saint Maria, or also Mother Alexandra, who was formerly Princess Ileana of Romania, who became a nun in America at the Holy Transfiguration Monastery in Pennsylvania? Do we know if she knew of those unconventional nuns who were living very different lives from, you know, in the world and in a social sense in a similar way to Mother Gavrilia.
Well, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Elizabeth. She edits all my texts in English, so my English words are mostly one with Elizabeth's words, and I thank her so much, all those years and this particular too. So she knows when she invites me, she would take part of the job. And I know I have no record of such an encounter. But what really puzzled me is that I also never came across Gavrilia. I saw the book in a library. There was some reputation that she was not quite Orthodox, so I let it be and waited. She was very secretive in her way. She traveled and assisted many people and nobody knew about it. It is possible, but there is no record.
Yes, I was communicating with a friend of mine who has helped organise the archive of the Fellowship of St Alban and St Sergius in Oxford, and she says that in the collection there they have some letters between Mother Gavrilia and Father Lev Gillet, who is another unconventional Orthodox person, but he sort of acted as a spiritual father for her. I think that's right.
Yes, this is right. This is reported in the book. It's one of the many things I omitted because I could not include everything.
Of course. I'm going to move on to Saint Porphyrios, and many people have said thank you for sharing your personal story, and we really value that, and thank you so much for that, and for blessing us with his walking stick. That was rather wonderful too. I just so the question that came up, where is it? I've lost it. Oh, really? Saint Porphyrios as a spiritual father. I mean, you've given us many stories of him giving spiritual help to you and your family. But I wondered whether you had a view on, perhaps you talked, sorry, I'm not expressing this very well. Let me start again. You talked a bit about when you were there and you were feeling anxious because you knew lots of people were waiting to speak to him. So you were very much there when he was seeing so many people, and you know the book Wounded by Love also shows that he was speaking to so many people, showing love to so many people. Do you think there was something significant in how he spoke to people, in how he interacted, that kind of led to this real popularity with people going to speak to him?
Well, from my own experience, he was very concrete. He would give you the correct advice. He would not give some vague thoughts. And there were cases he would not accept a person because he thought that he wouldn't listen anyway. So he also chose people. And well, this made me feel ashamed because there was a very long queue, and somehow he called for my aunt who was close to him, and my aunt went out and called for me. I was feeling so ashamed, you know, going at the front. And then he had, he didn't speak a lot during the latest years. He was very ill, but he gave a blessing, and he had this healing charisma too. So many people went there with their medical problems and asked for healing or for advice, or for someone in the family who had problems with drugs, with other addictions, with severe problems.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that both Saint Porphyrios and Mother Gavrilia had this sense of mission, and with your specialism in missiology, that must be a really fascinating part of both of their lives. Philip has asked, I've only recently become Orthodox and am encouraged by the missiological emphasis. What would you say are the main and distinctive features of Orthodox missiology? Now, that's a massive subject. So if you want to focus in perhaps on the missiology that we've heard about tonight, then that would be, how would you summarize it?
Well, in fact, your lecture series gave me an idea to offer a class for the Civis Pro European program and next summer semester in Athens, somewhat important figures of mission, and include Gavrilia and Porphyrios and some of the other people you presented. Our main methodology is example. I mean, enculturation and all, being present, moving around, going to the people, being eager to meet, all this. But of course, maybe also out of political and historical reasons, because we're not an empire, you know. It was all mostly small movements, and not this style of imposing oneself, you know, I come here, I have the truth, I give it to you. No, this has never been the style. Even with Cyril and Methodius, an invitation was required. And most of our mission theology, even in Russia, you know, little by little, is ascets and monks who influence a small environment of people gather around them, and this is how they move towards the east or towards the north. Of course, today, of course, we, I mean, I read Protestant and Catholic missiologies and gain from their vast experience, because we lack in quantitative elements. And I think, yeah, this could improve, but most important is you cannot avoid the question who you are. It's not what you say you're teaching, it's who you are, you show.
Yes, I thought that was really interesting.
I have answered enough.
For me, you've answered it, thank you. And I thought it was really interesting when you explained that Mother Gavrilia said that in Africa, Christ is a barefoot African.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really interesting way to look at it, because I think that agrees with what you've said. It's about not imposing, it's about going and seeing the people and encountering the people and them encountering you.
Of course, I wouldn't say that we are doing everything right. I mean, I have a hard time convincing icon painters to paint Christ as black, but anyway.
Moving back to Mother Gavrilia just briefly, Elizabeth has commented that she's read that Mother Gavrilia also knew Nicholas Zernov in Oxford. And he may well have spoken to her about India. I'm not sure whether before or after her visit, but certainly his experience, they may well have spoken together about India. I don't know if you know anything about that.
I don't remember that. I remember that she met with Zernov, but I don't remember the content of the discussion.
Yeah.
But it is possible.
Yeah. There's a couple of people asking about where to find the book. I think The Aesthetic of Love is out of print at the moment, but you may well be able to get a second-hand copy, or there may be some bookshops in different parishes which you can raid and find a copy of it. So, or get one from a friend. I know that Wounded by Love is still in print, so you can get that about St. Porphyrios. Regina asks an interesting question. What made St. Porphyrios happy?
Sorry?
If you can answer that. What made St. Porphyrios or Father Porphyrios happy?
Well, he was happy all the time because he glorified God. That was the source of happiness. And because I struggle with depression and all things we usually have, I started to implement this and also use the prayer, not just Kyrillation, but also prayer of glorification the same way. And because I have to walk because of cholesterol and high blood sugar, and you can walk in the morning glorifying God as you walk. This makes a person happy. I mean, life is a marvel.
Yes. Dan has asked, I'm not sure whether we'll be able to cover this in a short period. Could you please explain more about, you cannot avoid the question of who you are in missiology? What does this mean? Are you able to clarify a little for us?
Well, fathers of the church say many times that, well, do not look at the priests what they do, but do as they teach you to do. Well, this is a well-meant phrase, but in fact, people do not receive our teaching. They usually receive who we are. So we need to teach by example. By this, I do not mean that we have to be extremely reserved on mission and wait to become saints, because I mean, we are all saints. During liturgy, we receive communion, and it is, I don't know how it is in English, but it is given to the saints and is meant to us all, because we are sanctified through Holy Communion.
Yes, I'm remembering as you're speaking, Metropolitan Callistos, who uses often the principle of one, many, and all. So there is only one saint in Christ, but many are saints, those people who the church recognizes, but all are saints, all in the church, and the widest possible sense of church, all in the church are saints. That just reminded me of that, and since he's our president, it's nice to remember his words briefly. Father Ian says he's reading Father Lev's biography at the moment. That's good to know, and he looks forward to hearing, hopefully hearing more about Mother Gavrilia there. But he is also commenting that the vision of the love of God for all and service to all is something that really does link Mother Gavrilia, Father Lev Gillet, and Mother Maria, Saint Maria of Paris, who witnessed it so perfectly in their own lives. So that's just a comment there. Vasiliki mentions that public libraries might be another option for the ascetic of love to find the book about Mother Gavrilia. Yes, do use your local libraries and support them. And I think we've come to the end of the questions. I will just give a very short opportunity in case anyone has a final question. But before we do that, I would like to say thank you again to Evie for giving us this wonderful talk presentation all about Mother Gavrilia and Saint Porphyrios, Father Porphyrios, to you and your family. And I am so grateful that we have been able to continue to have this series, and despite the wildfires and despite the difficulties that they have caused, that we've been able to continue to have the talk. So I thank you again.
Thank you. I very much appreciate the way the topics you choose and the way you work on theological matters. We are alienated from the spirituality somewhat, and I'm missing it. I mean, you wouldn't see very easily series of lectures in Greece on saints. You would see on different, more academic topics. So I really appreciated it, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, no other questions have come in. Someone has asked for the prayers of Saint Porphyrios, and perhaps we can all pray for Taylor and Brenner and ask Saint Porphyrios's intercession for them. Thank you, Evie. As is our usual habit, we will go on to gallery view so that we can all see each other. So if you would like to turn on your camera before we leave, so that we can all just give each other a wave. It's so lovely. Oh, someone's got an icon there of Saint Porphyrios. How wonderful. The bowers there. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is the final session in our series. We may have another series in the winter. We're not sure yet. We'll see how things go. And we will certainly be having more events as the time goes on. A conference next year about angelic beings. That's a lovely link with Mother Gavrilia. And I hope that we can join each other in person or online very soon. Thank you again. Good night. God bless. Bye, everyone.